It's a pleasure to welcome back the commissioner of the AAC. He is Mike Aresco, and he's kind enough to join us on the Goldberg, New and Abraham Law Firm hotline. Commissioner, top of the morning to you. How are you?
Good morning, David. Hope you're well. Thank you for having me. Hope everyone's healthy there.
Yes, same with you and your family as well. Mike, we've got about 20 minutes here. Let's try to cover a lot of ground if we can. Can you explain to us, yesterday, you and the other commissioners of the Group of Five asked the NCAA for what, and I'll just read it here, temporary relief from several NCAA requirements for up to the next 4 years. What is it, so that we can understand, that you and your other commissioners are asking for?
Well, we basically, these are based common sense requests, David, that have to do with NCAA rules that might not apply during the crisis that we're obviously in. There's a football attendance requirement of, for example, you have to have at least 15,000 in actual or paid attendance for home football games. Well, as you know, in this uncertain time, we have no idea what the attendance is going to be, whether you're even going to be allowed to have fans if we're able to play. And, you know, I preface this by saying it's all speculation at this point. We simply don't know what we're going to be, permitted to do. What health and safety is going to be top priority, period. But that's the kind of thing that ultimately that requirement, should be waived based on the current situation. Also, you have to sponsor a minimum of 16, varsity sports. And, is there a possibility for some relief if, in fact, there are some sports that may have to be dropped, but maybe could come back at some point. There are some football scheduling requirements as well. There are financial aid requirements at this point that, we think potentially could be waived in view of what could be a fairly dire circumstance financially. There's some other cost-saving measures involved in some of the statutes. I don't want to get into. I don't want to bore your listeners with a whole lot of areas, but we took about not quite a dozen areas and said these are things that frankly need to be looked at. You've got a situation that's unprecedented, and really it was the kind of thing where we weren't necessarily expecting it to be public at this point, but we did go to the NCAA and said put this on the agenda, please, and we'll see if we can't work things out. Right now, as you know, David, we're figuring out ways to address the current financial challenges, and I've said this before. These are secondary. They're important, though, because they influence how you're able to support your student athletes, your coaches, your staff. But health and safety are the top priorities by far, and those are the kinds of things we've frankly focused on in every call with our ADs and every meeting. It's health and safety first. If we get the green light at some point to come back, what do we have to do? So that's what that was all about, though.
Well, prior to the green light, Mike, one of the things that came out yesterday, as you well know, is Cincinnati announced that it's going to drop men's soccer. As you look for this request for 4 years on some sports, how concerned are you that whether the 2020-2021 calendar or the 4 years down the road, that the potential of losing Division I sports exists? If soccer's going away at Cincinnati, it sends a signal to me, at least, Mike, that it's not the first and it won't be the last.
It's a possibility, David. Let's face it. There are going to be some serious financial challenges. However, I need to tell you that in talking to Cincinnati people and the athletic director, this was something they were thinking about before the coronavirus situation arose. This is something they had they were struggling with whether to keep their soccer program. Ultimately, they decided that the resources going into that would be better used elsewhere, that they could hire more people to support their other student athletes. So this wasn't directly tied. Everybody thinks it is because of the timing. but it wasn't directly tied to the coronavirus situation. Now, having said that, there's no question that if things become, if we lose football, for example, or we have significant impact from other financial situations, and that could mean lack of donor support compared to what it was. NCAA revenue, as you know, this year from the NCAA tournament already dropped by 2/3 for most schools. That is not the biggest source of revenue for those schools, however. So, that's not in the end, the end of the world. But we also, our conference, David, we're close to the P5 in a lot of ways, and I don't need to get on my pulpit about that. But we do rely more on student fees, some of our schools, and the student fees are going to be perhaps not what they were. You don't know what enrollment's going to be. You have no idea this fall what's going to happen. But having said that, we're a healthy conference. I don't see right now that we're going to be, our schools are going to have to drop sports. We've got reserves. We've been building up our reserves. We're looking into a line of credit. We're trying to do everything that is financially responsible in view of what we're facing. We're basically trying to plan for worst case. If there's football, then we're going to be fine. As a matter of fact, ironically, we've actually saved money in the conference itself by virtue of not having to run all the spring sports, which cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's something those are savings we obviously would rather not have had, of course, but they're there. In addition, we have cut out all travel. We've made many of our meetings virtual, so we've saved a lot of money there. There are other areas we've identified. If, in fact, there is no football or football is truncated or postponed, we've identified probably 2/3 of our budget could be cut in terms of savings. We spend just an absolute fortune. Everyone does on officiating costs and those kinds of things. Now, we hope it doesn't come to that, but we also are looking at other ways to deal with the financial challenges. I think we may make adjustments to the way we run our Olympic sports, and the goal would be to make sure that we don't have to cut those. That in fact, even if we make some adjustments, the whole purpose is to make sure that those sports continue. But again, the Cincinnati thing, I know it raised some alarm bells. There's no question about it. But in talking to Cincinnati and talking to the athletic director there, it was something that they had been thinking about, and it's just the timing is such that it looks like it's directly related to what's going on now. But again, we're going to have financial challenges. We're just going to have to meet them.
He's Mike Aresco. He's the commissioner of the AAC, and he's kind enough to join us here on Miller and Moulton. Mike, this is not a specific question about your conference or any of your member institutions. Is college sports going to be okay financially if they have to play darn near the next year without fans? That you'll get your TV money, but your schools and all the schools will not get the gate. Can college sports make it through a year like that? Kind of like what our business community is having to go through here, with what they're having to deal with. Will TV money alone keep big-time college sports afloat?
That's a really good question, David, and it's one that, frankly, is not being asked as much as simply, okay, what's going to happen if there's no football? If you have football and the TV money is roughly the same, and who knows? You don't know what adjustments there would be depending on when you play, whether the season's going to be postponed, as I said, whether it's truncated. There's even talk of playing in the spring. But if there are no fans, a huge hit, of course, because obviously the gate is important to a lot of schools, concessions, parking, merchandise sales. There's a lot of issues surrounding, the game day experience financially. But I will survive, and the TV money is critical, and it's critical to the conferences. I don't think there's any question about that. It's the biggest source of revenue for a lot of people, not for everyone. There are some schools that are really going to struggle in that environment. I think our schools will be fine. They'll take a hit, though, and that's where we will do everything we can based on our reserve funds, based on the cost-cutting measures we would obviously have to take we'll try to help them out, and we'll be able to. Other, the larger conferences, and we're right there with the P6, but we don't have quite the TV deals they have. You're talking about with some of the P5, some major TV deals. That's their, one of their largest source of funding, and obviously the gate is big. You take away 7 home games from a lot of these schools, and everybody has been building and has some debt. Our schools as well. Going to be an impact, no question about it. And but again, it wouldn't threaten the survival of our schools or the conference, but it would be hard. And then that begs the question: can you even do that realistically? If you if you're not going to have fans, that means that there's still significant risk, and health and safety, as I said, was a top priority. You're going to have, let's say, 150, student athletes, players. You're going to have staff, coaches, event staff. You're going to have a lot of people involved. Are you going to be able to, for example, test everyone? Testing right now is still limited, and people who really, really need it are not going to want to see it be done for maybe athletic teams. They might think that that's, not the best use of testing at this point. If in fact the testing is still a scarce commodity. And the other issue, of course, is testing going to do it itself? Will you have treatments by then, by the time we're ready to start football, whenever that is? We don't think we'll have a vaccine at this point. I'm not a doctor, and I'm not a medical person. We're going to take our lead, David, from the CDC, from the President's Task Force, the NCAA Medical Advisory Board. The conferences will have real input with the NCAA as to when we start, but whether you can play without fans is very, very questionable. But if you do, going to have an impact. But the TV money at least would, depending on how that shook out, depending on when you played and whether the schedule was changed, the TV money is still going to be very, very important to keep.
Mike, this seems way too simple, and I've got a million questions for you, but I'll start with this one. How the hell can we play college football if the kids aren't going to be there? I mean, isn't it necessary? Is it basically necessary? If we have online classes, we can play football. If we have kids not in dorms, can we play football? To me, and I know you're an athletic conference commissioner, but with pro football and with pro sports, it's different. With institutions and college campuses, if kids aren't back in campus, how can we play sports?
David, again, these are really, really good questions. And that one, we've talked about it. We've discussed it internally. We have an AD's call, an athletic director's call, every week. We have some additional calls as well when the need arises. We've talked to our presidents. It's very, very questionable if our sports in the fall can be played if the schools are not in physical session. Now, the question then becomes, okay, if we don't anticipate the schools, simply not going through with their mission, we don't expect them to close down. But if instruction is virtual, if it's online, can you still then bring, a group of student athletes to the campus? And if there's no one on campus, that means you've obviously got an issue. Now, could you isolate teams, and could you take certain precautions and certain protocols? But again, college sports, and this is what our mission, has always been an extension of the academic experience. It's part of our collegiate overall experience. And if you don't have students on campus, and if you don't have a functioning university physically, at that point, can you really, do this? That's a question that's going to have to be answered. I can't tell you what the answer is right now. I really don't know. But it would be very problematic, no question.
Mike, final question from me anyway is you mentioned earlier in an answer that this could lead to how conferences do their Olympic sports differently. Basically non-football and basketball. And there are some that are wondering, hey, is it time to basically do it by geography? That, I understand your conference may be spread out for football and basketball, the revenue-generating sports, but those that historically lose money should maybe I don't know, form different conferences or just try to figure out a way that to keep it a bus league, if you will, more regional. Is that what you mentioned, that might be the next step because of this pandemic, that it may force that difficult decision where conferences play their, under the American umbrella is going to be football and basketball and maybe a couple other sports, but then maybe the 11 D1 Florida schools form their own conference to play the Olympic sports?
Yeah, again, another, I'm sounding like a broken record, but that's another really good question, David. I think, could that happen? I suppose. I suspect that we would look to save money up, in other ways and keep the conference, functioning as an integrated whole. You would perhaps change, certain scheduling protocols, so that schools that are closer to each other would play perhaps more often. We've got a cluster of schools, as you know, in the middle of the country. We have 2 schools in Florida. We've got a few schools on the East Coast, but not as many, and we are geographically spread out. But so are the ACC, so are the Pac-12, so are the Big Ten, stretching from Nebraska to New Jersey. Everybody now, with the conferences having been enlarged, seems to have those issues. We would potentially have to look at how we schedule. I'm not sure we'd necessarily have to, shed teams and they would go to regional. We have this in hockey when people don't sponsor enough sports. We've got a few affiliate members because, we don't necessarily sponsor, enough, or their conferences don't sponsor enough sports. For example, Florida and Vanderbilt women play in our lacrosse league. So could that be something you'd look at? That would be a drastic measure. I do think, we're not going to be a bus league if we play all the sports under our umbrella. We're too spread out for that. But you can arrange, we do some travel partners now. We try to, cut costs that way. But you might just schedule differently, and that would have to be, you talk to the NCAA about how the automatic qualifiers work, because everything has unintended consequences when you do these things. But, to your larger point, David, something like this, a crisis like this, a situation that's unprecedented, generally leads to change, and it can be transformational. And obviously, there are things you're just going to have to do differently, and you're forced to think about things differently. We're going to look at all the ways we do things. We already have been doing that. We're looking at our cost structure. Those are the kinds of things you may look at those in the normal course of things, but when you have a situation like this and you know that something like this could happen again, you're going to take measures that perhaps you wouldn't have taken otherwise. Look at people working remotely now. Is that going to affect how people view office space in the future? I mean, I think yes. I like our office. I like being in an office, but yeah, it could mean that more people will be working remotely, that you can save money that way. With Zoom and the Microsoft platforms and all the others, there are a lot of ways you can do business. Are you going to obviously look at travel? Are you going to look at meetings? Are you going to do more meetings virtually? Are you going to say, I don't really need to? It's great to get together, and people may not shake hands, much anymore, as Dr. Fauci has talked about. There are going to be a lot of changes, and we're just scratching the surface right now. But we're going to look at every aspect of how we do business. Now, we're a nonprofit. As I said, we've been healthy. We've built up reserves, but we know that this is. We don't know how long this is going to last, and we also know that something else could be coming down the road. No one ever dreamed that we wouldn't have an NCAA tournament. We've never not had that happen, or that we could potentially have football threatened. I mean, no one really thought about that. Now we have to think about those things.
Mike, thanks for agreeing to do this. We really appreciate it. Be safe, you and your wife and the family, and thanks so much, and hopefully we can talk down the road.
Yeah, you too, David and Mark, and again, hope your families and you are healthy and safe, as well as your listeners and everybody, obviously, around the country, and especially where you are, in Florida. And again, thanks for having me. Appreciate it very much, and good luck, and let's all hope we can get through this quickly, because it's it's a human tragedy. We talk about our own situations and we talk about sports, but the larger picture, of course, is it's a human tragedy. And if we can get to play again, the best thing will be that we will have conquered the pandemic. So let's hope we can get through that as quickly as possible with some great developments. And again, thanks for having me. Stay healthy and safe.
Well said, Mike. Thanks for your time. Mike Aresco, the commissioner of the AAC. So much unknown, Mark. For example, I mentioned the 11D. Could you picture in the non-big boy sports, Florida, Florida State, Miami, USF, UCF, you got the 4 ASUN schools, UNF, JU, Stetson, FGCU, Bethune-Cookman, FAMU. There's 11. I haven't even mentioned FAU, FIU. That's 13. There are 13 D1 schools in the state.
Tennis, golf, swimming, the sports.
If the big three want to take themselves out of the equation for whatever reason, then we've got 10 with all left. If USF and UCF go, hey, sorry, we can't go down that low, if you know what I mean. Mark, that still leaves 8 schools in the state. Okay? Do the FAU, FIUs have to come down to FGCU's level from now on in the non-football basketball sports, or maybe even basketball?
Well, I think they could in basketball as well. They won't, because they still get serious money. I mean, they're getting television contracts. Now,
Conference USA.
Here's the question. Would a Florida sports net be willing to put up money for a Florida conference, in theory that the ratings on Florida Sportsnet would drive it because it's all Florida schools? I don't know the answer to that, but I don't think so, is my initial response from a basketball standpoint. I don't think there's enough there unless you had UCF and USF, and I don't think you get them.
And maybe not. Because obviously they're members of the American. They have their television deal and what have you. Was why I went down the road, because he mentioned, he was the one that said, hey, this could lead to drastic changes of the quote-unquote Olympic sports.
Now, that is a possibility. When you entered men's basketball, that's when I just said no. And the other stuff I think is very realistic and smart, and we've said that for a long time. The men's basketball should be. FAU and FIU should, but they're not going to, because they actually have legitimate television contracts. And you couldn't, hey, no, I don't want that, whatever it is, $400,000 or $500,000. I mean, that's a lot of money to a smaller program. So I don't see that happening given the situation going forward. The other things that they'd have to work through, and I only know this because the wife is constantly watching it, but like the SEC, believe it or not, their gymnastics is a big deal. A lot of these conferences have their niche sports that are pretty big. And it would, people smarter than me are going to have to figure this out. But at the end of the day, the one thing that we've said from the get-go that, to, I believe, us has to happen first is football needs to be on its own. I mean, that's, to me, the one thing they've got to get out of this at the NCAA level. We can't be losing soccer programs, and I get it, they may have gone away anyhow, but it's going away because of football. That's why it's going away. You got to make sacrifices at some point because of the 75, 80 scholarships you're giving away for your football program.